Uh, Sir, I will start now.
Absolutely.
Good evening, everyone. Uh, Good evening, dear professors, my professors, my colleagues, and my seniors. To today's 4E webinar. The topic for today's seminar is interventional radiology in endocrine practice. To speak about the topic, we have two eminent professors from our country. Uh, I would first like to welcome our chairperson for today's seminar, Dr. Sanjay Badada sir. I would like to share my screen. Sir, are my screen visible, sir?
Screen is visible.
Yes, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Sir, Dr. Sanjay Badada, sir, he is currently professor and head in the Department of Endocrinology at PGI-MER Chandigarh. Sir has a special area of interest in metabolic bone disorders and diabetes of young. Sir is currently he's a chairman to be elected in RSSDI Punjab chapter. He's actively involved in teaching and research. Sir is also founder and current secretary of Social Group Support Aditi, which is Association of Diabetes of Young in Tri-City. Also, sir is a contributor of various chapters in numerous textbooks. Sir is contributed a chapter in Williams' textbook of endocrinology and also in the textbook of parathyroid. Now, I would like to request Sanjay sir to kindly introduce the speaker of our today's topic, Dr. Sarvesh Tiwari sir. Sir, I have shared a screen for you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nilanjan and West Bengal Endocrine Society for the opportunity to participate in such an important topic. And we have a great speaker for this today's meeting, that is Dr. Sarvesh Tiwari. Dr. Sarvesh is presently working as assistant professor in the Department of Diagnostic and Intervention Radiology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Jodhpur. His area of interest is glioma research, imaging in acute ischemic stroke, and neurointervention, ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke. And he has many publications, and he's a member of various societies like IRIA, the ISNR, and American Society of Neuroradiology. And I am really very fascinated with this intervention radiology. Indeed, a new thing that is they are doing what surgeons cannot do. So that is a really very fascinating. And I'm very eager to listen Dr. Sarvesh on an important topic, that is the role of intervention radiologists in the endocrine imaging. And if I think that is two most important but the most difficult conditions. One is that Cushing's disease. And many people say that about Cushing's disease is that if someone says that I know lot about the Cushing's disease, then probably he has not seen Cushing's disease. That is one thing. And the second is the adrenal venous sampling. That is another very important and difficult area. That is the what called hyperaldosteronism, and that is the, I think, the intervention radiologists are savior in these two diseases. Without them, it is difficult to manage these two conditions. Those are really a hardcore endocrinology. With this brief comment, I hand over the mic to Dr. Sarvesh, and I am very eager to listen from him about these two intervention radiology techniques. Over to Sarvesh, it is all yours now.
Thanks a lot, sir. It was very kind introduction. Thank you.
Deep actually.
Sir, I will stop sharing my slides, sir.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. The slides are visible.
Your screen is visible.
Yeah.
And you are audible.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So over the next 30-35 minutes, we will discuss various opportunities where we interventional radiologists can collaborate with our endocrine colleagues and can do some benefit to patients. So if I divide the scope of intervention radiology in endocrinopathies, I can talk about them in two subsettings. It can be in lieu of endocrine venous sampling or therapeutic procedures. So as sir mentioned, these two are the lion's share of the indications for which patients are referred to us. IPSS, inferior pituitary sinus sampling, and adrenal venous sampling. There are others like selective venous sampling for primary hyperparathyroidism, renal venous sampling for hyperreninemias. These are not a very common indication and very rare. I mean, I have not done for these indications. They are there in literature. So I have mentioned them over here. As regards to therapeutic procedures like metastasis from neuroendocrine tumor or metastasis from hypervascular metastasis from thyroid cancers, they can be dealt with interventional treatment. Cystic thyroid lesions or relapsing cystic thyroid lesion can be dealt with percutaneous ethanol injections, or when a patient with CKD cannot be taken for surgery for secondary hyperparathyroidism, IR can help with percutaneous ethanol injections.
Your mobile is ringing actually.
Yeah. So we will start with the procedures where we can take care by endocrine venous sampling. Now, this relies on the fact that if we are able to sample a draining vein from an organ and we're able to demonstrate raised hormones in that draining vein, we may be able to localize the organ which is releasing those hormones. And the most common indication for these are primary aldosteronism, Cushing's syndrome, and hyperparathyroidism. But it is very important to stress that it is not one team which can go there and do this venous sampling procedure. It requires a comprehensive teamwork where we actually like to have our endocrine colleague in the intervention suite so that they can time the samples and they can tell us that yes, the samples has been collected adequately before the patient can be shifted out of the intervention room. Now we will start with IPSS. So Cushing syndrome, it can be exogenous and endogenous, and when it comes to endogenous, most of these are secondary to ACTH secreting pituitary microadenoma, and they constitute about 80 to 85% cases. They are seen in the 3rd to 4th decade of life, and they're more common in female. And the other group is ectopic secretion from the adrenal adenomas or carcinomas and ectopic ACTH producing tumor. So why do we need this inferior pituitary sinus sampling? Now, after there is a clinical and a biochemical diagnosis of Cushing syndrome made, the patient is subjected for cross-sectional imaging. Now, in this cross-sectional imaging, MR is the workhorse. But MR, even in recent days where we have 3 Tesla MR and we have very good sequences where we can acquire millimetric images, 1 millimeter images, even then, the chances of missing a small adenoma may be around 30 to 40%. We do dynamic contrast enhanced pituitary MRI, and they have kind of improved the detection rate, but still a very small pituitary microadenoma can be missed. Further, we know that if we do a cross-sectional study among normal individual, we may find incidental pituitary adenomas in 10 to 20% of cases. So we should be very sure that that adenoma that we have picked up in the MR is actually the cause of patient's symptom. So to solve all these queries, the answer is to go ahead with the inferior pituitary sinus sampling. So before going into the procedure detail, we should know the relevant anatomy of the area. Now, if you see here, this is a schematic diagram where we see this is the pituitary gland. These are the cavernous sinuses. These are the meshwork of cavernous sinus. And the cavernous sinus, they drain posteriorly through the superior pituitary sinus and posterior inferiorly through the inferior pituitary sinus. And there are multiple connections in lieu of condylar vein and the basilar plexus. Now, if you see the anatomy, the IPSS lies kind of in a straight line to the internal jugular vein. To cannulate SPS will be a very difficult task. So IPS, that is the inferior pituitary sinus, is the preferred venous structure to enter and collect sample from. Now, this is a DSS, a digital subtraction angiogram, and this is a venogram where you see that these two structures, this one over here and this one over here is a 4 French catheter. Both these catheters are within the inferior petrosal sinus. And you see here, this is the opacified cavernous sinuses, and this is the intercavernous communication. And you see a kind of meshwork over here. This is the basilar plexus. So this is the anatomy that we see when we cannulate the inferior petrosal sinus. Now, this is a normal anatomy, but how often do we see a normal anatomy? It is around 70%, where you will actually see a good inferior petrosal sinus connecting the cavernous sinus and the internal jugular vein. Okay, and there are various types depending on the joining of condylar vein. Now, why is this condylar vein so important? Is that if we see a good condylar vein, our catheters should be beyond this condylar vein. Otherwise, there will be contamination from the peripheral venous system and you will get a wrong value. So if you see a condylar vein, my catheter should be beyond this so that I get a pure sample from the cavernous sinus. So, and in certain cases, like in 24% of cases, you might not have an inferior petrosal sinus. Rather, you might have a plexus which is connecting the internal jugular vein to the cavernous sinus. So in such scenario, we might need to place a small catheter inside, or we might not be able to take a sample at all. And sometimes there is no connection at all, or you may have a condylar vein directly draining the cavernous sinus. So these are the conditions where you might end up just taking a sample from the jugular vein, which is actually not representative of your actual condition. So coming to the technical detail, now when we are requested to go ahead with inferior petrosal sinus, we need certain information, certain blood investigation so that we can carry out the procedure. We need hemoglobin, platelet count, and coagulation profile of the patient, along with the viral markers and renal function test. Bilateral growing safe, because we are going to puncture on both sides. So both sides growing safe. We prefer it from the level of umbilicus to mid-thigh. It should be completely shaved off, and patients will be fasting for at least 6 hours. Now, the procedure is done under sedation or without the use of anything. We prefer it that the patient lies down. We counsel the patient that it is not going to be much painful. If there is pain involved, we may prophylactically give IV paracetamol or IV Dynapar and kind of avoid the use of any drug for sedation. And we need people in the lab. It's a teamwork between the radiology and the endocrine department. Now, we prefer this bilateral venous accesses are taken. Hello?
No, Sarvesh, continue, please.
Yeah, sir. So now these patients with Cushing's syndrome, they are generally fat. So you might have a problem in gaining access to the common femoral vein. So it's always better to use ultrasound guidance to take this venous access. We use one bigger size sheath on the right side and a 5 French sheath on the left side. We take a bigger side because so that we can take a peripheral sample from that sheath. So if I'm punching the right side, I'll be putting a 6 French short sheath. On the left side, I'm putting a 5 French short sheath. Now, we give 5,000 international unit for the entire procedure. Then there's a traditional approach where we use one catheter and that directly goes into the inferior petrosal sinus. This is what we practice here. We take a 4 French soft tip vertebral glide catheter through these short sheath and we cannulate the inferior petrosal sinus. There are other people who do coaxial technique where they take a 5 French sheath into the jugular vein, and through that sheath they use a smaller size microcatheter to cannulate the inferior petrosal sinus. Both the approaches are fine. The traditional approach is cost effective, so we use that. Now, these catheters, they are taken over soft wires and we reach the jugular bulb. Now, remember, any manipulation in the area of jugular bulb, jugular foramen and the dura will be painful to the patient. So once we reach the jugular bulb, we will tell the patient, see, you will feel my wire, you will feel some pain in your head, just don't move, it will take 5 minutes, we will be inside. Or if the patient is apprehensive, we can give IV paracetamol or Dynapar for attaining adequate analgesia. And we can cannulate both the inferior petrosal sinus subsequently. So if you can see here, this is both of my catheters. So this is a lateral image of an X-ray. This is the sella turcica. This is the skull. This is the clivus. So always remember that my wire should go in this direction. It should go along the clivus and reach the region of sella. So this is the trajectory of my wire. If my wire is going in this direction, I am sure that I am entering the inferior petrosal sinus. And this is, for example, this is an injection where I've taken when I've already entered the inferior petrosal sinus. You can see that the tract or the trajectory of the inferior petrosal sinus. This is in the AP. In the anterior posterior view, my catheters will be pointing slightly upwards and medially. So my wires will also go in this direction. And if my wire is going in this direction, I know that I am cannulating the inferior petrosal sinus. This is the AP or anterior posterior projection where my catheter is inside. It is inside. You see, this is the IPSS and it is coming here where it is blending with the internal jugular vein. I am well inside the inferior petrosal sinus. So this is how the IPSS, this represents the IPSS and this represents the cavernous sinus and the intercavernous communication. So we usually are 3 people who are scrubbed operators there. And because one will be taking samples from the peripheral sheath and 2 people will be taking sample from the bilateral inferior petrosal sinuses simultaneously. So we always kind of discard the 2 ml, first 2 ml of the sample, and then we collect the desired required amount of blood from each sinuses. And it is done simultaneously. All the 3 operators will be drawing the blood simultaneously. Then as decided by the endocrine team, it is CRH or vasopressin, which is injected at the optimum dose according to the patient. And then we take the sample again at 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes interval, and then it is done. So this, I think you will be knowing better, a ratio of 2:1, that is of peripheral before the CRH administration, and a ratio of 3:1 after CRH administration, a diagnostic of a pituitary source of abnormal ACTH secretion. And if we can demonstrate a gradient between the right and left and a gradient of more than 1.4, it allows to lateralize that which side is abnormal or where the suspected microadenoma is likely to be. Now, talking about complications, in venous procedure, if we are careful with our wire manipulation and we don't poke it on much, complications are relatively rare. So in skilled hands or a person who has been doing intervention for some time, the complication rates are less than 1%. Now, because IPSS is in the region where the brainstem will drain, so there are possible risks of having a transient or a permanent brainstem ischemia, a brainstem hemorrhage because of a venous thrombosis, or if we rupture a vein, it can lead to subarachnoid hemorrhage. But these complications are extremely rare. So this is what, like, after we have confirmed with the history that there is endogenous cause of Cushing syndrome, serology has confirmed it. We do an MRI. If there's a large size macroadenoma, which is more than 10 millimeter, patient can straightforward go ahead with surgery. But if there is a microadenoma or the MR appears normal, IPSS has a role in helping out to find out the cause for secretion of ACTH. Let us see this example. Now, if we see these 2 images, this is a plain T1 image and this is a T2 sagittal image. Now, if you see, we don't see much. The gland doesn't appear enlarged per se. Now, if you see that there is a distinct asymmetry, this is the right side. So this is the optic chiasma. This is the pituitary stalk. This is the gland. These are the flow voids of the internal carotid artery. So if you see here, the gland looks slightly asymmetric, slightly bigger on the left side as compared to the right. This is the only thing we see here. On the SAG image, the height appears normal. Now, this is again a T2 coronal. These are the dynamic images. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And as we see, the contrast is pairing. There is an area anteriorly slightly anterior to the pituitary stalk, where you see this area, which is hypo-enhancing. It is in the inferior aspect on the left side. and it is persisting even in the delayed phase. Now, this is a post-contrast T1 image. This is acquired 3 minutes after the injection. We still see that there's a distinct hypo-enhancing lesion here. And this is at the end of 1 hour. We always acquire a 1 hour post-contrast image where we see that there is an internal filling. If we compare these two images, there is an internal filling happening in this nodule. So we gave it as a left-sided pituitary microadenoma. And I think, okay. So, and then the IPSS was performed, and these are the values which we got. And we see that from the IPS, this is the left central ACTH values, right central ACTH value. This is the peripheral ACTH. We have prolactin on the left side and the right side and periphery. And this is the peripheral cortisol. All the values are there. This is at the baseline, then CRH was injected, and this is 1, 3, 5, and 10. And we can see that the values are quite high on both the sides. On both the sides, and in the baseline image, if you see that the left side is kind of more. So on evaluation further, we found that the prolactin was more than 2, which confirmed that my catheter was in the accurate place when the samples were taken. There is a definite central to peripheral gradient, and it's more on the left side. This is basal ACTH to peripheral ratio. This is prolactin corrected ACTH ratio, which is again more on the left side. And this is the intersinus ratio between left and right. It is more towards the left side, it's more than 1.4. So probably lateralized to the left. So when there is a concordance here between the IPSS results and the MRI. This patient has got operated recently. So this is all about the inferior pituitary sinus intervention part per se. We will move ahead to the second important topic, that is adrenal venous sampling. Now, primary aldosteronism is a very important cause of secondary hypertension, and sporadic as well as familial causes, they account for 5 to 10% of cases. Now, most of these are attributed to either an adrenal adenoma or a bilateral adrenal hyperplasia. Adrenal carcinoma is a rare etiology for primary aldosteronism. So after a proper nephrologic and endocrine workup, where the aldosterone to renin ratio is supposed to be more important, the patient is subjected for cross-sectional imaging. Now, both CT and MR, they do perform very well in detecting adrenal adenomas, and their sensitivity will range somewhere between 70 to 90%. Between these two investigating modalities, a CT is always preferred over MR because CT is very good in picking up the fat poor adenomas, number one. Number two, nowadays with the modern scanners, you have some millimetric scans, which is around 0.6 millimeter possible. So even a smaller adenoma can be picked up. And further, if you are planning for an intervention or you want to plan for adrenal venous sampling, the image can be used to exactly localize where the adrenal veins will be. So basically planning your procedure, planning surgery and planning an IR procedure if at all is required. But we have to remember that the cross-sectional imaging is insensitive to very small adrenal adenomas. And further, if there is a very mild unilateral hyperplasia, might be difficult to comment on CT scan, and the result will be ambiguous. Further, we know that if you take a cross-section of normal individual, around 2% will have an incidental adenoma, which are non-functional, which is particularly more common in elderly population. So below 40, it's fine. You are not, it's very less likely that adrenal gland will contain an adenoma, but above 40 years of age, particularly in the 60s, there are greater chances to have incidental non-functional adrenal adenoma as well. So these are the things which might make localization a little difficult. So whom to offer adrenal venous sampling? So first thing, the patient should agree for surgery. If a patient doesn't want surgery, there's no point going for an adrenal venous sampling. So if a patient seeks for long-term cure with surgery, then you have to first see what is the cause. If it's a large adrenal tumor and we are suspecting an adrenocortical carcinoma, again, there is no point of going ahead with the adrenal venous sampling. Or if the patient we are suspecting or we are confirmed that this is a familial hyperaldosteronism, again, it is a bilateral condition, AVS is not going to help. If the patient doesn't want intervention, he says that he's fine that if there is a 25% chance that the wrong adrenal gland may be removed, or he might need a relook, then there is again no point. But if the patient accepts that yes, he wants to be very sure what is the exact site of tumor or exact site of secretion of aldosterone, and he accepts that you, even after the procedure might be unsuccessful, when might not be able to enter the right adrenal vein, which is actually difficult to cannulate, and there is a small risk of complication, if yes, perform AVS. Now we have to know the anatomy of the adrenal vein before trying to cannulate the vein and do the adrenal venous sampling. So look at this image. This is a axial contrast CT image in the portal venous space. This is the aorta, and this is the inferior vena cava, and you can see this outpouching over here, which is the adrenal vein. So the adrenal vein on the right side is located at the posterior lateral aspect of the suprarenal IVC. If you look at this two images, this is a graphical representation. This is the IVC, and this is the vertebra. So most of the orifices of right adrenal vein will lie from between T1, T11 to L1 vertebra. And you can see this bar. So this bar represents the frequency. So they are most common in the region of T12 vertebra. And if you look at the axial cross section, most of these veins, they are located in the posterior right lateral aspect. So in the posteriorly and to the right side, we are going to find the adrenal vein on the right side. On the left side, the adrenal vein will drain as a common trunk with the inferior phrenic vein. So this is the left adrenal vein. This is the inferior phrenic vein. They will form a phrenico-adrenal trunk, and they will drain in the left renal vein. So if you see here, this is the inferior vena cava. This is the left renal vein, and this is the structure that we are looking for, which is the left adrenal vein. We need to cannulate this structure to do the sampling. Now, what are the prerequisites for performing AVS? The hypokalemia which happens in these patients needs to be corrected. We need to give proper antihypertensive medication. Anti-mineral corticoid should be stopped. We should have a good team over here. I mean, the good lab, good endocrinologist and IR team to support this test. Patients should be made to lie supine for at least an hour before we take the patient for AVS. And we should always evaluate the previous imaging so that we can plan the procedure better. Again, like IPSS, the procedure is better performed with conscious sedation. Now, we have to see that the anatomy is a little difficult, so we need different kind of catheter. So we need a specialized catheters like Cobra or SIM. We can see this, they have a double curve. These are double curve catheters. These catheters are required for hooking the right and left adrenal vein. So like here, some people suggest that you should do bilateral venous sampling simultaneously, which is not always possible. It can be done through a single venous access as well. We do give heparin of 5,000 for all patients. Then regarding pharmacological stimulation, so there are two schools of thought. Some authorities, they don't want to stimulate, other they want to stimulate, and synthetic ACTH is given because it dampens the temporal fluctuation in secretion and increases the selectivity index of sampling. So this is what I've taken from literature. We have not done any case of adrenal venous sampling at our place here. So basically infusion of co-syntropin at 50 milligram per hour is initiated 30 minutes before the case starts, before the procedure, and is continued till an adequate sample is obtained. So this is an overlay X-ray image, which is just showing that this is a D12 vertebra because there is this rib coming out of this. And this is the usual location for the right adrenal vein. And this is the image where a right adrenal vein is cannulated. And you can see this corkscrew or a lacy appearance of vessel of adrenal gland. This is how, if you take an angiogram after cannulating adrenal vein, the structures will appear. This is on the left side here. We have a SIM2 catheter, which has cannulated the left renal vein. So this is the IVC. This is the structure we're talking about. This is the adrenal trunk, and we are supposed to cannulate this. And this is an angiogram where we see a lacy and tangy appearance of the vessel of left adrenal vein. Now we have to be very careful that these glands are not forcefully injected, because if you forcefully inject them, what will happen? We are going to rupture these veins and the patient will have adrenal hemorrhage. So these injections, we have to be very, very careful so that we don't cause any venous rupture. Ideally, a single 4 ml blood sample from each location, that is one from the peripheral sheath, which is a venous sheath or axis sheath, one from the adrenal vein, and one from the left phrenecoadrenal venous trunk. So these samples are required. Some people like to have this intraprocedural rapid cortisol assay. If it can be done in the IR suit itself, and we can demonstrate the presence of adrenal venous cortisol to peripheral cortisol ratio greater than 3, it means that our catheters were inadequate or in good place when the samples were taken, and the results that we will obtain from the sampling will be reliable. So, so this value is very important. And how do we interpret? If the lateralizing index of more than 2 for unstimulated and more than 4 for stimulated sample is there, it is an adequate study, and we are able to lateralize the gland which is causing this tumor. Why should we do AVS? Now, if adrenal venous sampling study is done and it is able to lateralize the condition to one of the gland, the potential benefit of the surgery is greater than 50% chances of cure and greater than 80% chances of at least some improvement in the blood pressure. So that is there. We can tell the patient that the chances of benefit is more if we are able to lateralize with adrenal venous sampling. Complication, the only major complication that happen is adrenal vein rupture, which can lead to a glandular hematoma, adrenal hematoma, or a retroperitoneal hematoma, which is around 0.6 to 1% in literature. Now, apart from these two procedures, the other areas are like doing a selective venous sampling for primary hyperparathyroidism. Now, we don't directly go for venous sampling in these conditions. Obviously, we're able to localize it with nuclear scan studies with 4D CT scans. And the indication is only when the primary surgery for hyperparathyroidism has failed. A patient who has failed the first surgery, then we might need to look what we have missed and where we have missed. And then we might have a role of doing a sampling, of venous sampling for this condition. So, so if you see the anatomy here, we have these 6 veins over here. There are superior thyroidal veins on both sides, the middle thyroidal veins on both the sides. And from the left brachiocephalic vein, you have this inferior thyroidal vein. So you might need to enter each of the veins and do a sampling and demonstrate where the PTH is high, and that location we might find the residual adenine. So if we do a specific vein PTH, I mean one of this vein, specific vein PTH to peripheral PTH, and the value is greater than 1.5:1, it will give us a positive predictive value of 72%. So remember, this is only when we have failed surgery and we are looking for a residual adenoma and the cross-sectional imaging is not able to help us. Similarly, these are some certain emerging venous sinus sampling procedures, like there is something called arterial stimulation and selective venous sampling for pancreatic endocrine tumors. Now, we have read about it, we have not done it, but these are procedurally not complicated. It might be time consuming and it needs great coordination between 2 teams. Now, these are offered in patients with insulinoma and gastrinomas. So if we are able to localize the tumor on a triple phase CT scan, the story ends over there. Or if you're able to localize with a nuclear scan, the story ends over there. Now, the role of IR comes when the conventional techniques, they fail to localize the tumor, and we have to do something extra to find what is causing hypoglycemia in this patient. Then we might think of this as a last resort. Let us find out. So what is happening in this condition? So it is called arterial stimulation. So we need to enter an artery, a segmental artery, stimulate the pancreas, and then collect a venous sample later. So we need to have both arterial access and venous access. On the venous side, we will place a catheter in the right hepatic vein. So there we are in the right hepatic vein on the venous side. On the arterial side, we will cannulate the celiac axis and the superior mesenteric artery. We'll place a microcatheter each time in the distal and the proximal splenic artery, in the gastroduodenal artery, and in the hepatic artery proper. And we will each site we will inject. Suppose we are dealing with insulinoma. Here, the substance that is going to use to stimulate is a calcium gluconate. So 5 ml solution of 0.25 milliequivalent of calcium will be injected per artery. Suppose splenic artery, 1 injection, and after 10 minutes, we'll take the venous sample from the right hepatic vein. When we come to the hepatic artery proper, we inject calcium gluconate again and then take the sample. Similarly for gastroduodenal artery and the SMA branch, which is supplying the pancreas. So these are the things which can be done when the conventional techniques fail. For gastrinoma, instead of calcium gluconate, it will be secreting at 30 units in 5 ml per artery, which will be cannulated. So if we get a twofold increase in insulin or a 50% increase in gastrin, we might say that this particular arterial territory is one which will be harboring the tumor. The other thing is in case of testosterone secreting tumors, in ovarian tumor in female, where we're not able to localize by a conventional ultrasound and CT and MR, where we can actually go and cannulate the ovarian vein and then sample testosterone from there. So these are the other indication for doing and your venous sampling procedures. Just a little bit about the therapeutic procedures here. The role of IR, as we talk about, if we have neuroendocrine tumors and we have a large metastasis which is inoperable by surgery, IR can come into play. We can do a transarterial chemoembolization where we selectively cannulate the artery which is supplying the tumor, reach close to the tumor, and then we inject a combination of lipid oil with doxorubicin. People are trying with mitomycin C as well, so that the doxorubicin and lipid oil mixture will go and stay in the tumor and will stay there and will cause the effect. Or you can also try transarterial radioembolization, where yttrium is used to be injected and cause chemoembolization, radioembolization. The other potential use of IR in endocrine will be the use of percutaneous ethanol injection. So these are ultrasound guided procedures, which can be done for cystic or predominantly cystic thyroid nodules, which are benign, hyperfunctioning thyroid nodules, or recurrent thyroid carcinomas. When I say ethanol injections, I mean absolute alcohol, which will be in a concentration of 95 to 99%. When you use alcohol or ethanol at this concentration, whenever this solution comes in contact with any tissue, it will cause coagulative necrosis. And there will be cell dehydration and protein denaturation. Plus, when it comes in contact with a vessel, it causes ischemic necrosis of the small blood vessel and thrombus formation. So it causes both ischemic necrosis and coagulative necrosis. For thyroid nodules, mostly it is done for cystic thyroid lesions, where you aspirate the cyst, then you see the volume of the cyst which has been aspirated, use around 30% of the volume alcohol, and you're not supposed to go beyond 5 ml per session and never exceed 10 ml, because this volume of absolute alcohol can actually cause pulmonary edema. Now, some people usually keep it for 10 minutes and re-aspirate. Some people, when they're injecting very small amount, 2 ml to 3 ml, they just leave it like that. It depends. So these are the procedures where IR can help endocrine department. And we know that this venous sampling procedures is going to evolve. Though we are having a great advances in cross-sectional imaging, there are cases where we are in dilemma whether this is the cause for the patient's symptom or not, and we need to contemplate doing venous samplings. And it has to be a collaborative effort both the team need to sit together and talk about how to go about the procedures, the protocols. It has to be institution based and it has to be case based. Further, IR can help in therapeutic cases where as an adjunct to surgery or where surgery is not possible. These are my references, and these are very good articles. One can go through it. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Sarbesh. Very nice presentation and covered from the diagnostic to the therapeutics aspect of the endocrinology, where the intervention radiologist can play a very, very major role. So I think now this presentation is open for the question and comments.
Participants are requested to kindly put their questions in the chat box. So can we start discussing the question? We have one question till now.
Yes.
Question is from Dr. Pankaj. They did a AVS recently for one of their hyperaldosteronism patient. Though the procedure looked good, we ended with no cortisol gradient between the adrenal vein and the periphery. What could be the cause? And can we still interpret the aldosterone values?
If we go by definition, if there is no gradient between the cortisol of adrenal vein and periphery, it means we are not in the proper location. We are not in the adrenal vein. So either the catheter has slipped during the procedure and we are not able to get a proper sample from the. This is what I understand from this, sir.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Sarbesh is correct, that because that is the most important thing, because until unless you have the because that is a step for the catheterization, whether it is in the like in IPSS or it is in the AVS. So the gradient is must. The gradient is not there, meaning by that not appropriately catheterized. Then there is you cannot actually interpret. So that is there, but sometimes people do one thing that is called contralateral suppression index, in which they basically cortisol corrected aldosterone, they compare between these two, and they say if the ratio is less than 0.5, that disease is contralateral. But I think the best is that we should have the catheterization should be there, then only you can interpret, otherwise you cannot interpret the data. So, Sarbesh, I am sure you must be doing IPSS very frequently there. So, how frequently you are facing this problem of anatomical variations?
Sir, it is not very uncommon. Not very uncommon. Usually one side we are able to cannulate, sir. Once you will not have both the IPSs absent. Usually one side is always there. So once one side is there, the ideal is to enter that IPSs and do a injection and see what is the channel which is connecting the contralateral side to the IJV. So if you have entered the left IPSs and you take an injection from the left IPS, it will opassify the IPSs, the cavernous sinus, and whatever channel is communicating the right side of the cavernous sinus to IJV. If we can get a tract or something, we might try cannulating with a smaller size microcatheter. Otherwise, it will not be possible.
So, do we have any more? Do we have any more questions?
Okay, and in your experience, any common complications you come across the IPSS?
So, luckily, till now, no, sir. We have not found any complication with that.
That's good, very good. Because many times we do in our institute routinely when there is indication of IPSS is there, and sometimes that catheterization is a problem. So that maybe
yes, we might fail, sir. We might fail sometime to cannulate only. Yes, that is the most common thing.
Yeah. And what you are using agent, CRH or ABP? What agent you are using there?
Both we have used, sir. Both we have used. Yeah. So last case was CRH. Yes.
CRH is freely available.
So I think my endocrine colleague will be able to better that question answer that.
Okay,
Yes, we had.
we are actually not getting the CRH very frequently, so we are mainly doing with the AVP, and that's why you are using a different regimen of the sample collection. We are using some different regimen of
Yes.
sample collection.
Yes,
So
sir.
that's the difference, I think, because that will depend on what agent you are using to stimulate that.
Yes, sir. Yes. So we rely solely on our endocrine colleagues for
Yeah.
this protocol. Yes, sir.
Obviously, that is a teamwork. So that is very, very important. And I think the laboratory support is equally important
Yes.
because to have the reports on time to reach to some conclusion. Yes. And are you doing any other thing like the calcium stimulation test and all? No.
No, sir.
Okay. At our center, we do AVS also, but I think we have done few, but sometimes it is a problematic yet, and once or twice we had a adrenal hemorrhage also.
Yes, sir.
That is
Yes,
one
sir.
of the issue with that.
So
So
actually,
yes, Sarvesh, please.
sir, actually, the case load, I mean, if we keep doing it, suppose 2 cases a month or monthly, the chances of complications will automatically go down. Problem happens that we will get a case once in a 6 month or once in a year. So it's like a new case for all over again.
Yeah. Okay.
So that learning curve that we call it never ends with these kind of procedures.
Yeah. So you are suggesting that you get more number of tests so that you will be able to right.
I mean, it will become a kind of a routine procedure with more standardized values.
And
If you do it like once a year, it is difficult.
Yeah.
So we are a very yes.
How much IPSS is costing at your center?
So actually, we are doing it for free because catheters are free here, and I'm doing with 4 French catheters, so we are not charging patient anything.
Catheter is free.
Our institute so far is giving us free, sir.
You are living in a luxury, man. The catheter is free because we are stuck with the catheter because
no, sir. If we take a micro catheter, sir, like that, if people are many people they like using micro catheter. They'll take a catheter inside that they will take a small catheter. Most people are using that. If I use that, it will be 50,000 per case. Sir. If I am able to use, so far we have been lucky. All cases we have been able to do it with 4 French. So 4 French glide, and that you always have with us. So there is no cost to the patient.
This is freely available.
Yes, sir. It is freely available.
So what is micro catheter? What is the diameter like?
That is a 0.27. That's like, it will be, if I can put it in perspective, it's somewhere 2.5 to 3 French, like that.
Okay.
3 French. What comes, the conventional catheters are 5 French. So we are taking a 4 French in between so that it serves the purpose.
Right, right. So any more question from the participants? So if there is no more question, I'll hand over mic to organizers. And I profusely thank Dr. Sarvesh for the very nice presentation. Really enjoyed and learned a lot regarding this anatomy of the cavernous sinus and all these things, the IPSS and all. So good. Thank you. Over to organizers. Yeah.
Sir, I would like to thank Dr. Sarvesh Tiwari sir for delivering such an extensive talk and covering all the aspects of the endocrine intervention that we require in endocrinology, radiological intervention. I also like to thank Dr. Sanjay sir for giving his valuable time for chairpersoning this session and moderating the session. And I would like to share the next FORI webinar that is on 17 September. The topic is current practice in patients with follicular cell-derived thyroid cancer. And the speaker for the topic is Dr. Sayantan Roy, sir. So hoping you all to join for the next session. And so we can conclude this session today's session, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Sarvesh. And thank you, Dr. Nilanjan. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.